Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, November 16th, 2015, start of a brand new week, halfway through November, closing in on Thanksgiving, which may be good or bad depending upon current events. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, hand hovering over the telephone, ready to answer the phone when you call on in with your comments and questions. All right, so stepping back and taking the overview of what's been going on since last Friday. Russia is destroying ISIS in Syria and Iraq, so ISIS, for some reason, attacks France, using fighters that snuck in as refugees. And so the U.S. government plan is to declare war on Syria and Iraq, but keep the refugees coming on in. And if you think that doesn't make a lot of sense, you're hardly alone on that one. Very clearly, the U.S. is trying to go back to the pre-Russia situation in Syria, U.S. bombing Syrian infrastructure after Bashar al-Assad, and they're putting pressure on Russia to bow out. Russia's not going to do that. Now, the indications that this is a false flag. This was another classic false flag. They're beginning to pile up all over the place. Over the weekend, I put up a story about the suicide bomber who exploded himself inside this sidewalk cafe. And I pointed out on the video where this vest that he was supposedly wearing just had big chunks of wire tied to it, dangling down. Didn't go anywhere. Didn't connect to anything. Huge, thick wire. Costume piece. And none of the large plate glass windows in the front of that cafe were so much as cracked. If you look at the video from Russia Today, the police have taped their barricades to the sheets of glass. Now, we've all seen what real explosives can do in terms of damage. This definitely wasn't it. Now then, everybody is out there saying we have to go into Syria because those gosh darn Syrian ISIS members. And then turning around and saying, well, we shouldn't stop the Syrian refugees just because the terrorists are sneaking in with the Syrian passports. It turns out, however, authorities have determined that 2 of the passports found next to what were supposed to be suicide bombers are complete fakes, probably made in Turkey. Now, what that tells us is we don't actually know where these people came from. Just that they snuck in as Syrian refugees, but if the passports are fake, we don't know that they're Syrian. And yet the agenda in Washington, D.C. is we're going to go into Syria. We're going to give them what for. Absolute nonsense here. Now, everybody is trying to hop on board and take advantage of this situation. And there's a very interesting article over at the Times of Israel acknowledging Jewish community centers in Paris were warned ahead of time of the impending mass terror attack, just like Odigo in New York on 9/11. Now, Obama is out there saying that the U.S. had no specific intelligence on the Paris attacks, had no idea it was coming. Well, we're hearing all these stories about how French government authorities knew it was coming. Obviously, Israel knew it was coming. They were warning the Jewish community centers. Somebody knew it was coming ahead of time. Obama saying it wasn't him. Well, let's take him at his word. If Obama did not have any specific intelligence, then it proves that spying on law-abiding Americans is a total waste of time and money. So let's shut down the NSA, the FBI, the CIA, and get our Bill of Rights back. What they're doing clearly does not work. And already all the heads of these intelligence agencies are saying, well, Paris proves we need a bigger budget. We need more money to go on completely missing what's going on here. Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been quoted as saying the Paris bombings will make France and other countries understand Israel's war on Palestinian terror. Remember on 9/11? When he was asked what he thought, and he said, oh, it's a good thing. Well, it's not a good thing, but it's going to make sympathy for Israel. The repeats are just going on. And one more. The French media is celebrating the fact that the authorities were able to deal with this multiple-site terror attack so quickly and effectively because just by luck, There was a multi-site terror attack exercise that started just that morning. So all of the necessary assets were already in place and already set to go when the multi-site terror attack happened. Just like FEMA was in New York City the night before 9/11. There was a terror drill involving a subway bombing taking place at the exact same time and place as the 7/7 subway bombing in London. It's got all the marks. It's got all the marks. Now, there was a YouTube channel put up, Videos Paris Attack exclusively. And they had a whole bunch of videos about what was going on. And then somebody with very sharp eyes noticed that the channel had been set up November 12th, 2015, one day before the Paris attacks happened. The channel has now been taken down and scrapped without any explanation whatsoever, and I'm sure they're out there saying, if you ever think there was such a channel like that, you're just a tinfoil hat kook conspiracy wacko theory, except that we all made frame captures of the page, because we knew that's what was going to happen. Now, Cynthia McKinney put out a report that she saw the Paris attacks being reported on Twitter before it actually happened. And they've already got a news story out there saying, oh, no, somebody was using a bot, and the bot messes up, and it puts the wrong date on the thing, and there's nothing to see here whatsoever. Now, Twitter blocks bots. I used to use a tool called TweetAdder. It's now had to go away because Twitter blocks bots, or at least those used by ordinary civilians. So if somebody is botting Twitter, it's somebody inside the government. A lot of confusion regarding Geraldo Rivera's daughter, because some media stories are saying she was at the stadium, others are saying she was at the concert hall. And by the way, have you noticed there's a rock concert supposedly going on at that venue? Nobody has produced a cell phone video of what went on inside. And there's one other story that's getting just a little bit weird, and this is not yet confirmed. But the story is they're making a big deal over the fact that there was an American citizen who died in the terror attack, a student, Nohemi Gonzalez, from Southern California. She was there in France studying design, and she was unfortunately killed. Unfortunately, the Mexican media is reporting that her parents called her after the attack was over, and she said, "We're just fine." So there's something really weird going on over there. Up in Canada, a Sikh gentleman has launched a lawsuit because somebody in the Canadian media took a picture of him and photoshopped it and presented it as one of the Paris attackers. Guy wasn't even in the right hemisphere. And they're out there just faking the evidence. Ooh, those bad, evil Muslims. Bad, evil Muslims. All right, let's grab ourselves a couple of phone calls here. Al in Ontario, Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I sent you an email with the photos of that video that you were just talking about. So the photo of 158 views, and then the photo of the information on the person that uploaded the video, which was created on Thursday the 12th.
Okay, I'm not sure that I've seen that yet. I get a lot of emails every day. Some of them.
Oh, I understand
with
that.
With bad words in foreign languages in them as well. But I'll have to take a look for that.
No foreign language, and there's no bad words.
Of course not. You're Canadian.
Oh, I know how to swear.
All right, well, listen, I'll look for that.
Even in French.
Oh, it sounds beautiful in French. All right, I'm going to have to let you go. We've got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back with more phone calls after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And, boy, I've never seen the phone lines this full in my entire life. Let's get some phone calls out of the way. John in Barbados, aloha. Welcome. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. I'm considering sending you a donation, Michael.
Thank you.
To replace that worn-out egg timer.
Yeah, the egg timer really got worn out. Actually, it only got about halfway through before this Paris story began to fall apart. But yeah, it's like everything else in this room. It's pretty well worn out.
Well, I've been getting reports actually that the attackers were actually French nationals, not Syrians, not Libyans, but second, third generation from that neck of the woods, but not actually. And now the French have come out and saying all these dual nationals that we're going to have to take their French nationality away from them.
But until they catch them, they don't know who they are. With the admission that the passports used to identify the perpetrators are fakes, we don't know who they were. Were they Syrian? We don't know that. Were they French? We don't know that. Were they Israeli? We don't know that. We do know the witnesses described one of them as very clearly having a military bearing in the handling of his weapon.
Yeah, well, apparently, according to the Daily Mail in London, a relative of one of the attackers handed himself into the police, him and his family, just to be on the safe side.
Yes.
And apparently he was questioned and he was released.
Okay.
So we know so at least one of them is French.
All right, well, that's good. That's good to know. So, why aren't we bombing France? Why are we bombing Iraq and Syria again?
Well, I think that's it, isn't it? And it's the same old story, isn't it? Supposedly Al-Qaeda destroys the World Trade Center, and off we go and bomb Iraq. Why?
Well, but that's always the agenda there. I mean, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia, and we attack Germany. That's the way these things get done. And what's really obvious to everybody here is the timing. Russia comes into Syria. They're able to push ISIS back, dramatically underscoring the utter failure or unwillingness of the United States to deal with their own creation in Syria. And the U.S. is now trying to get back in control of the situation in Syria. They want Russia out so they can go back to the real agenda of getting Bashar al-Assad out and replacing him with a puppet ruler. And I don't think Putin's going to allow that to happen. I think by the time everybody gets done wringing their hands over this bloody shirt here, we're hearing the Syria army is making huge gains north of Latakia. We're rapidly approaching a point where Assad and Putin are going to say to the U.S. and everybody else, ISIS is gone from here. You don't need to come in. There's no reason for you to be here.
Well, I noticed that the 10 French aircraft that went to attack ISIS flew mainly through Turkey, nipped over the border into Raqqa, bombed the place, then nipped back over the border into Turkey and flew back. They don't go anywhere near the Russian zone.
Well, I saw that as well, and, they may be saying we're bombing ISIS, but they've been saying that for the last year, and what they're actually bombing are refineries, pipelines, food storage, hospitals. They're probably back to the same old game.
Probably, yes. But it's looking, apparently, in the meeting that was held recently between Putin and Obama, when Putin was leaving the meeting, apparently he was looking on the television screens, and there was Erdogan and Obama shaking hands, and Mr. Putin was heard to say he's such a child.
Yeah, we heard that. Anyway, John, listen, I'm going to have to let you go. We've got a ton of phone calls here, and I'm going to try and get as many as oh, boy, the line's already ringing again. Damien in New York, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, good to talk to you. I'll try to be quick and brief as possible. I think people really need to understand that the goal here is to, we know they want to dismantle, destabilize, and gain control over the region completely. And it looks like one of the tricks they're bringing out, this could have been the trick all along, is to basically gain a hatred, and that hatred being of Muslims. So how do you do that? Well, you've got the proxy of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and you've got different sects and different groups in between here, and they're killing mostly Muslims. But this isn't being reported.
Yes.
We're not hearing that. We're not hearing about ISIS killing other Al-Qaeda members and beheading them on the battlefield or vice versa. We're not hearing about that.
And we never hear of these evil Muslim terrorist groups. They don't attack Israel. Have you noticed that? ISIS doesn't attack Israel.
Exactly. No,
because Israel...
Exactly.
Okay.
No, exactly. So, what I'm saying is that this is building, now, the United States could simply quash this notion. They're trying to say, there's this undertone of, don't hate all Muslims because of these, such and such groups. But they could quash that by simply saying, ISIS and Al-Qaeda are actually killing each other on the battlefield. ISIS is actually killing more Muslims than any other group of people. But they don't report that because they want to fuel that hatred, because what happens is this gains more support for ISIS if they can try to show that, look, you've got people in the United States, people in Israel, wherever you go, that are attacking non-violent Muslims. They're attacking members that want nothing to do with ISIS. And these people are starting to look at this and say, well, why would I want to be on the side of someone who's going to kill me because they think just because I'm Muslim, I'm a terrorist or something like that. So they're gaining support because of this hatred. And the United States could quash that hatred, but they're using it as a tool so that they can gain more support. And then this way, this gives the United States more of a reason to go in and dismantle and destabilize. And I think that's
exactly what's been going on. I mean, everybody was in there.
World War III.
Okay, Putin, when he was up there at the G20, came out and said that Russian intelligence is saying ISIS is being funded by 40 different nations. And there's a story over here that we linked to on Aleppo News. France is one of them. Talk about blowback. France funded the Syrian rebels, meaning ISIS, to overthrow Assad. France was funding terrorism. France is a state sponsor of terrorism. So is the United States of America. So is everybody else who was in there fanning up these groups and building them. And remember, it is now confirmed the U.S. created ISIS. There's a declassified official U.S. government document that says that was the policy, to fan up these terrorist groups and use them to redraw the map of the Middle East, and it's just backfired on them horrendously, okay?
Right. I'm saying that I think the real weapon here is hatred. I think that's the weapon that they're going to use to start World War III. And they're going to incite hate, and that's what's going to separate. It's going to separate everything, and they're going to be able to swoop in and claim to be the hero to take care of the quote unquote problem.
Yeah, which is what they've done before here. But you know, looking at the independent media, nobody is buying that this was a genuine attack by Muslims. Now we know that at least one of them was a French national. And my concern, though, is that this is just the warm-up, that they're just going to keep on staging more and more horrific false flags until we all throw up our hands and say, sure, take what's left of our money, take our children, blow up the planet, we don't care anymore. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back with more phone calls. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. The phone lines are loaded up. Everybody wants to talk about this. I'm going to get back to the phone calls in a second, but there are 2 points I need to make here. Okay? Only a few months ago, France passed a draconian surveillance law, their equivalent of the laws here in the United States that say the government can record all your phone conversations, read all your texts, look at all your email. Didn't really work, did it? Because spying on law-abiding citizens is not going to get you close to the terrorists. It's a complete waste of time, unless your goal is to scare your citizens into staying silent, which isn't working either in France or here in the United States of America. Always there's an excuse why, despite all the money spent on the NSA and the FBI and the CIA, why those gosh darn terrorists were just able to evade us. Belgium's Home Affairs Minister is saying, oh, well, the reason we can't find the terrorists is they're communicating over PlayStation 4. They're playing video games and sending secret messages to each other, and we can't monitor that. So every time there's a terror attack, it's a sharp reminder that all of this spying and suspension of the Bill of Rights isn't really producing anything useful. They just want to do it here. Even Trump has gone out there saying, do you realize that one of the reasons these terrorists could do what they did, or false flag actors, nobody could shoot back. France has incredibly tight gun control. Everybody in France is a victim. All right, let's grab some phone calls here. We're going to go to Mike in Fairbanks, Alaska. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good afternoon, Mike. I'm calling about what I think the reason for this might be. I actually sent you an article last night, going into more detail. But you remember back a few days before the bombing occurred, Netanyahu met with Obama and was trying to get recognition of the Golan Heights as belonging to Israel.
Yes.
They've been trying to do the same with the UN. You remember that?
Yeah, I remember that. And the White House said, no, we don't recognize Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights. The European Union said exactly the same thing.
Correct. And just a few weeks ago, an Israeli oil company called AFEC Oil announced very positive results for their drilling in the Golan Heights. And AFEC Oil is owned by an American company called Genie Energy. And on Genie Energy's strategic board of advisors is Dick Cheney, Rupert Murdoch, the guy who's giving you the news, James Woolsey, former head of the CIA, Larry Summers of the U.S. Treasury, Jacob Rothschild, and Michael Steinhardt, who is an American hedge fund manager and a philanthropist for Jewish causes. Now they have been wanting to develop these fields for Israel because Israel is needing a new source of energy for its continued expansion. And I think that my hypothesis is that this was an event to try to get the UN and to try to get the UN to have an excuse to back up Israel in a ground offensive possibly in Syria to try to finally take Syria over and hand it over to Israel, which is part of the greater plan of Israel anyway.
Well, it's certainly one of the possible agendas, but you need to understand when something happens like a staged terror attack or an assassination or a war, it's never being done for just one reason. What you have is a large group of people, each who have their own agenda that happens to overlap with the others, saying we need a war, we need Kennedy killed, we need war in Vietnam, we need a terror attack in France, and that's how these things happen. So definitely a possibility, but not exclusively.
Yeah, and I mentioned that in the article too. I agree with you. There is no one reason for any of these things to happen, but I think this is a thing to look at. Because of that meeting that did occur and
you may be right, because Israel only yesterday came back on out and again demanding that the U.S. recognize Israel's annexation of the Golan, because once Russia and Syria have ISIS kicked out of Syria, Syria's going to want the Golan back.
Right, and Israel wants it for itself, but it always has. Another thing I'm wondering too is if something like this did happen, what kind of retirement were the leaders of Europe being offered for compensation, considering that their euro is about to collapse?
I'm sure there was some very golden parachutes being offered to everybody if they will just go along with letting Israel once again steal things that don't belong to it and claim it for their own and then sell it to us all at a nice discount.
Yeah. Anyway, I sent you that article last night if you're interested. That's about all I had.
All right, I'll hunt that down. Thanks an awful lot, Mike. We're going to let you go and switch over to Andrew in New York. Aloha, Andrew. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I wanted to talk about the Paris attack. And interesting enough, in November 5th, Francois Hollande said that it's going to send the aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle into Syria. And then Thursday it was reported that already was in Syria, so this false flag was planned already, and they just waited to have the excuse to attack Syria.
Yeah, they prepositioned the assets in order to go in there, because I'm sure they're all recognizing they're going to have to go on the heat of the moment, based on how quickly the 9/11 hoax fell apart, Saddam's nuclear weapons fell apart. And again, this one's already falling apart as far as the independent media is concerned. And by the way, I've seen a couple of corporate media outlets question whether this is really what we're being told it is. So they're going to have to move real fast, because the emotion is going to wear off and people are going to back up and say, wait just a second, we have seen all this before. You know, Jewish centers get warned ahead of time. Everybody seems to know it was coming. The U.S. officially denies knowing it was coming, and the drill going on at exactly the same time and place to deal with exactly that kind of terror attack. We've seen this pattern before. Okay.
I was watching CNN this morning, and John McCain and Lindsey Graham were being interviewed, and they seem so confident that there's going to be another 9/11 if the U.S. doesn't send troops and get involved in Syria right now quickly.
Oh, I'm sure there is. They're probably personally signing the checks for all we know. And yes, I am very concerned that, this is the last time they're going to be able to go back to this well. And if they can't get us all hot and bothered for war with Paris, then there's going to be something bigger right in the United States of America. And I'm going to be talking about that a little bit lower down, where we're talking about how all of a sudden the Department of Homeland Security is buying radiation detectors. Okay?
All right, thanks, Michael.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over here down to an anonymous caller who's been waiting very, very patiently. And what's on your mind?
Hi, am I on?
You're on the air.
Hey, so I was actually reading an article that I think you posted about Hillary Clinton being connected to the deaths of like 30-some individuals.
Yes.
Could you summarize that and explain what you know about that?
Well, there are a lot of people who were caught up around the Iran-Contra gun and drug running operation. And the U.S. end of that was in Arkansas while Bill Clinton was governor. And a lot of the people who knew about it wound up dead. A lot of the people laundering the money wound up dead under very suspicious circumstances. Of course, it was the case of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster that inadvertently launched my transition from a film career into the truth movement. Again, when you start looking at it, you see all these obvious signs of cover-up, and you have to ask who benefits. Now, I do have an article at my website. In fact, on this commercial break, I'll post it to the top of the main page so you can go and take a look at some of what's there and what evidence there is. But, yeah, we have drug criminals, government-sanctioned drug criminals running the government. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to grab one more phone call real quick. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, how come they're not putting a Russian flag and a Beirut flag on the U.S. Embassy in France?
Well, because this is all a U.S. show. We're not sharing the stage or the spotlight with anybody. Oh, and by the way, all those Black Lives Matter and anti-First Amendment protesters on all the college campuses, they're now whining and crying that Paris has taken the media spotlight off of them. They're throwing tantrums over there because of that.
Do ISIS lives matter?
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean...
The Russians know.
Well, you know, Bashar al-Assad made a good point. What happened in Paris is terrible, but it's been what's been happening inside Syria every single day for going on 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, this... you had that on the last caller. He says it might... You know, he thinks it might be because of the Golan Heights. But the problem is Russia's on the west part of the country, so I'm definitely thinking it's more about the pipeline still. Just because Saudi Arabia is like dying.
It's about all that stuff. You know, again, you should never get suckered into this idea that there is a single reason for an assassination or a single reason for a war or a single reason for a false flag attack. There's always multiple overlapping agendas depending on who is playing in there. And that is certainly true here. They want you to think there's a single reason for all of this stuff so they can hand you the reason and say, this is history, go home happy. But it's far more complex than that.
Hey, Mike, I watched it on RT the day before you posted it on that gentleman on RT about coercive migration. I think everybody should watch that video on how they will destabilize an area and all the immigrants will go into another country and basically destabilize that country. Basically, they're creating, like Europe is finished. You're looking at a European Union that's finished.
Yeah, it very, very much is. And of course, this is George Soros and that guy over at the United Nations. They're dreaming of a single planet with no borders and everybody goes everywhere. And look, and the fact that it's blowing up in their face and a lot of innocent people are being harmed and killed in this, no big deal. They've just got this vision that they're in love with, of their shaping of the world to some arbitrary ideal. And they're caught up in it.
One banking system, too. That's the key. One banking system where everybody is a debt slave.
That's exactly it. One global central bank with no other possible alternative way of running the global economy to keep humankind as permanent debt slaves forever until the sun swells up and eats the planet. They're taking us back to serfdom and feudalism. That's what this is ultimately going to be, where instead of the people owning the land will own the people, and you will spend your entire life living and working and doing whatever you're doing with the permission of their lords and ladyships, the nobility. That's what they're trying to take us back to. It's going to be a whole new dark ages.
You know what's amazing to me, though, how obvious this is? The French aircraft carrier, which has probably been in port for the last 40 years, because when's the last war the French have been in? All of a sudden it leaves port toward where? Syria. And then you get get this attack, it's like, doesn't take a genius
what an
to figure
amazing coincidence here. And anybody who doesn't think it's a coincidence is a wacky tinfoil hat kook conspiracy theorist.
It's just crazy how nobody is even really mentioning the Russian airline that blew up. It's just, we're all French today. How come we weren't all Russians, when that happened? Or how come we're not all Beirut people? It's just we're all French because basically we're just making the Russians and the Beirut accidents disappear because they're not one of us.
Well, I think Russia downplayed what happened to the airliner, and they're saying that basically they're almost done with the material studies on this thing. I think Russia downplayed it because Putin understood. This was a staged act of terror to open the door for the U.S. to return to Syria, and Putin wasn't going to give him that opening. It's just like when Roosevelt ordered the U.S. Navy to sink German shipping prior to World War II, when the U.S. was still officially neutral. And Hitler refused to bite. He let the ship sink and said, well, yes, it was a horrible, tragic case of mistaken identity. And that's why Roosevelt had to change his game plan and goad the Japanese to attack us at Pearl Harbor so he could get his war with Germany that way.
And I'd be very surprised if all the people, all the ISIS they're killing, I bet you 99% or 95% of them are coming from Saudi Arabia. That's where you go to get a proxy terror army. I guess.
I don't know that. I mean, you can get proxy terrorists from everywhere. I mean, Israel's the master of that. The false flag terror attack, the bombing of the King David Hotel, the Lavon affair, attack on the Liberty, attack on the USS Cole, 9/11 itself, by way of deception. Thou shalt conquer. That's the motto of the Mossad.
Yeah, well,
okay.
Everybody's moving into Syria, Mike, and you got all these different countries in Syria now. You're looking at a world war.
Yes, that's exactly where they're going. And the real war is going to be between the U.S. paper dollar and the Chinese yuan and the Russian ruble. That's what's driving all of this. Which brand of ink and paper we're all going to use for the next 100 years, loaned to us at interest by the private central banks. All right, we got to let you go here, Dustin. We're coming up on the top of the hour news break. I want to get some stories in here. Bernie Sanders knows exactly who to blame for Paris, for the terror attack. Global warming. He actually said that on Saturday, that climate change is what leads directly to the growth of terrorism. So, if you all pay your carbon taxes, the terrorists will go away, according to Bernie. Now, here's an interesting article. Again, everybody is using this tragedy for their own agenda. In the wake of terrorist attacks on French citizens who by law are disarmed and not allowed to shoot back, residents of Greensboro, North Carolina have been asked by their police department to show their commitment to safety by turning in all their guns. Because, heaven forbid you shoot one of those terrorists. That would really annoy them then. Over in the occupied territories of the West Bank, the chief rabbi for the Israeli settlement of Kiryat Arba, Dov Lior, went out and said that the attacks on Paris are payback for the Holocaust. Now, setting aside the implicit admission that Israel carried out the Paris attacks, I'd like to remind the learned rabbi that the Holocaust, however it did or did not happen, was not the fault of the French people, but the Nazis. But that's his attitude. You French, you deserved it for what you did to us 70 years ago. Completely reckless thing. Now, as you've already heard, there's a new, well-produced, high-quality production video. ISIS threatening to strike Washington, D.C. We're coming to get you if you don't get us first. People in the governor saying, how many more innocent people do we have to kill? I mean, how many more people do the terrorists have to kill before you agree to send your children out to conquer the world for us? And by the way, given that the Washington Monument was already cracked and weakened by that fracking quake, that gets my vote as the likely target for the false flag. Meanwhile, the White House has come out and assured us all that ISIS lacks the capability to attack the United States. I'm sure the French authorities were thinking exactly the same thing last Thursday. But the propaganda is definitely contradicting itself. Obama has stated the U.S. is going to stick with their current strategy against ISIS. You know, bombing Syria to force Assad out, but not actually going after ISIS. That strategy. They're going to intensify it, but that's been the goal of this whole thing. For the U.S. to go back into Syria and under the guise of fighting terrorism, make war to remove Bashar al-Assad. The U.S. has already sent huge new weapons shipments to the militants in Syria, meaning the terrorists. And remember, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting there's going to be a different outcome. Meanwhile, as I mentioned earlier in the show, the Syrian army is pushing back the terrorists from more territories north of Latakia. And so Obama is in a race to get back into Syria and remove Assad before Assad and Putin declare ISIS is now gone from Syria and the Americans don't need to show up anymore. That's the race. That's the rush. Got to take a break for news and commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Now, obviously, there has been a major collision, head-on, between the agenda to revive the war fever, to get the American people to go along with flinging more of their money and their children into Syria and Iraq and wherever else the U.S. government wants to go. And that has collided head-on with the agenda of spreading the world's population all over the place, willy-nilly, no more borders. And they're really kind of stuck out there trying to figure out what's going on. But over at the G20, the European Council President Donald Tusk has said, well, the refugee problem is all Russia's fault. If Russia hadn't gone into Syria, we wouldn't have this immigration problem. First of all, Syrians were flooding into Europe before Russia even showed up. Since Russia has gone in to get rid of ISIS in Syria, 1 million Syrians have turned around and gone back home. So I think there's one thing that we can learn from all of this. Truth has become such a valuable commodity that the government is going to economize it at every opportunity. All right, moving on here. Now, Putin has indicated that Russia may just send 150,000 ground troops to Syria to simply finish off what's left of ISIS. And if he does that, it's all over. ISIS will be gone. The United States and the West will not have an excuse to go into Syria unless they're going to stand back and say, all right, this war on terror thing was a cover story. We want to get Assad out, put somebody friendly to us in, and your kids are going to go do it for us, which is not going to go over well in an election year. All righty, let's see, we already talked about that. Now, Canada's new Prime Minister, Trudeau, has issued an order to end the Canadian combat missions in Iraq and Syria. And so I think we can expect an ISIS, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, terror attack in Canada any minute now. In fact, maybe I ought to start the egg timer on that one here. By the way, Pepe Escobar, you've all heard of him. He lives in that area of Paris where all this stuff went down, the cafe and everything. And he was interviewed on Press TV and said that most of the residents of those areas are immigrants and dark-skinned or black population. Very few indigenous French in that area. Basically, he's also reporting he was hearing 3-round bursts in the gunfire, meaning these are military arms that they had. The Iraq Army is sending 1,000 backup forces to al-Baghdadi region. And by the way, there's some interesting stuff that's come out about al-Baghdadi himself, outside of the photos of him being buddy-buddy with Senator John McCain. It turns out that's not his real name. And he's not Arab. And if you want more details, you can go to the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com and take a look there. Now, the Red Cross has formally accused the U.S.-backed Saudis of deliberately attacking healthcare facilities in Yemen. They're joining with Doctors Without Borders to say these are war crimes. They're not an accident. Accident once, one shell. When you send an AC-130 gunship to repeatedly strafe a medical facility and shred it, that's a deliberate attack. Now, Netanyahu is out there trying to defend the new illegal settlements in Jerusalem and the Golan Heights as tensions build. He's out there building settlements on the Golan Heights to sort of cement the idea, well, it's Israel now, and you can't make us tear the settlements down and take away the homes of those Israelis who, of their own free will, decided to live on somebody else's land. And, of course, convicted Israeli spy Jonathan Pollard is set for release next week. He's going to go home to Israel, be greeted as a hero, parades, streets named for him, government pension and medical care for the rest of his life. Over in South Korea, police are clashing with 70,000 protesters at an anti-government rally in Seoul. They are not happy with the warmongering that's going on over there. Only a year ago, there was serious talk about a reunification of the two Koreas, like they did in Germany. But the U.S. didn't want that. The U.S. wanted that state of war. It's one of the vectors by which they're trying to kick up a war with China. All right, turning to the economic news, as you know, the stock market did very, very well today, led, not too surprisingly, by the weapons manufacturers. Their stocks are soaring. They're looking forward to a new bloody global conflict and how much money they're going to make off of it. They're out there saying war is good for business. Well, it is for people in the business of war. For everybody else, it's really kind of nasty. And by the way, I reprised to the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com an article I wrote a while back called Majestic Memories. And it's basically based on the Jim Carrey movie, The Majestic. And I identified with it very, very closely. And if you have a moment, that's something you might want to read. Because the reality is, it doesn't matter which side wins or loses. You know, one government gets to fly the flag and proclaim victory, but for ordinary people on both sides of a war, they suffer from it. They're all defeated in this war. Those who lose family, those who lose their livelihood, their business, their future hopes all get destroyed. Only the bankers and the politicians really win in a war. Now then, we've been talking about this incredible scandal of student loan debt. Lure kids into college with promises of high-paying jobs when they graduate. They graduate with a huge student debt load and no jobs with which to pay it. And it's become a national scandal because as this whole student loan thing got cranked up, financial support for college education vanished. Very few scholarships, usually into various targeted special privilege groups. But general economic support from tax dollars for education has vanished. We don't need to spend tax dollars giving people a college education. That's what the student loans are for. And it turns out the government had a financial motive because the U.S. Department of Education has made $51 billion in profit off of their government student loans. That's equal to the profit of J.P. Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Citigroup, and Wells Fargo combined. This according to the Congressional Budget Office. The government is making money, turning your kids in college into debt slaves. Now, the Finnish parliament is undertaking a debate. They may drop the euro because their own economy is in terrible, terrible shape, and as long as they stay connected to the euro and the European Central Bank, they don't see a way out. So Finland is looking at dropping the euro, possibly leaving the European Union itself. Here in the United States, the Empire State Manufacturing Index drops again, numbers worse than expected. Economists were expecting a drop of 6.5%. It actually dropped 10.75%. That's bad. If you don't have manufacturing, you don't really have a healthy economy. Even the New York Times is now admitting Obamacare prices are skyrocketing, and because of those sky-high deductibles, these policies are actually useless to the Americans being forced to buy them. unless you suffer a serious injury or illness, you will never use your insurance policy during the year because you're still working towards that deductible. It's the worst of both worlds. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm looking at the Fox News feed, and President Obama says U.S. will not change the strategy against ISIS. And, of course, that's what it's all about. Russia spoiled the U.S. game of pretending to go after terrorists, but in actuality making war on Bashar al-Assad. And now, waving the bloody shirts from Paris, Obama is going back in to say, we're going to run this war the way we think we ought to. We don't know what Putin's response is going to be. I don't think it's going to be favorable. A lot of people out there saying it's time for us to have boots on the ground in Syria, which we already do. They've already opened that door with the advisors and the trainers. The problem with the boots on the ground is you're going to have reporters there taking videos and pictures of who it is they're actually fighting. And if the pictures come on out showing U.S. forces fighting Syria's forces, the game is up. They want to go on with the air campaign so they can show you a video of a big blob of smoke and fire and say, trust us, that was an ISIS headquarters. Absolutely, we wouldn't lie to you, we're the U.S. government. And again, hasn't worked in 5 years. So let's do more of the same. Because Obama wants to go down in the history books as a war president. That little Nobel Peace Prize sort of being an antithesis sense of humor situation. All right, let's talk about politics and the stagger towards the White House next year. And I got to tell you, this is already reaching the point. I'm already burned out on it. It's just like when you see in the department stores, they've already got the Christmas decorations up. The special Christmas section is there with ornaments and decorations and things to buy. And nobody's in there. My wife and I were down at the mall the other day, and we saw the holiday section is up. It was absolutely empty. By the time Christmas gets here, we're going to be totally burned out. Every year it's the same thing. We get into the autumn, we think, maybe this year we'll have a tree. And then we start getting hammered with the Christmas music and the decorations and all the, the postal mail about, Christmas is coming to this. And by the time we get to Thanksgiving, we're burned out on it. We change our mind. No, we're not going to bother with a tree this year. We've already had it. It's not decorations, it's decor, and it's very tacky. Same thing is happening with our political race. People are starting to tune out. They're not going to be able to hold the interest of the American people from now through the next election. Maybe that's the plan. We'll be so zoned out they can steal the election and nobody will notice. Meanwhile, over in GOP land, there must be a great tearing of hair, wailing and gnashing of teeth. The latest polls show Donald Trump at 42%. Ben Carson is at 25%, Marco Rubio at 10%. Donald continues to pull ahead. Now, these poll numbers are following his Saturday Night Live performance, but before last Friday's attack. And I think Trump's numbers are going to go right through the roof because Paris underscored exactly what Trump was saying about the immigration policy of the government. It's an open door to problems. Now, a lot of people are chastising Donald Trump for his over-the-top attack on Dr. Ben Carson. How dare you call into question his honesty and truthfulness? And there's a lot of press out there saying, how dare you do that? You should leave him alone. And they're basically saying Trump's vicious attacks are the reason that he's pulling ahead in the polls. No, they are not. Carson is self-destructing as all of his lifetime of self-aggrandizing deceptions start to come apart at the seams. There's the West Point story that has no support to it. His claim that he sheltered white students during the riots that followed the assassination of Martin Luther King has fallen apart. Nobody who was there remembers it ever happening. The violence against his own mother story, which even if it's true, that's not somebody I want in the White House. The stabbing story, and now it's come out that significant portions of Carson's book, in which he admits to committing plagiarism in college, was plagiarized to the point where the publisher is seriously considering pulling it from the bookstore shelves. Trump didn't do it. Ben Carson did. Now, Hillary, during this last Saturday's debate, which was overshadowed by the events in Paris, not a lot of people watched it, mostly because it's a study in foregone conclusions, but Hillary was grilled about all the money she's taking from Wall Street for her campaign and tried to justify it that it was okay to take all this Wall Street money because of her agenda supporting women and because of what happened on 9/11, which is an absolute complete disconnect. Some of her opponents tried to quiz her on the wisdom of the war in Iraq, the wisdom of supporting ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and Hillary danced away from it and left herself wide open for the perception that she's very reckless about starting wars, doesn't think them through. Now, getting on to the refugee crisis, obviously that is very much becoming a firestorm. Now, over in Germany, their defense minister is out there saying, look, you shouldn't link the terrorism that happened in Paris with the flood of Syrian refugees coming into your country. You should welcome them. Really, that's not a problem. And she came out with this comment that terrorism is so well organized, it doesn't have to risk the arduous refugee routes and sometimes life-threatening crossings at sea. Yet, that is exactly what those passports demonstrate happened. The terrorists got into Europe by posing as Syrian refugees. Now, the passports have been denounced as fakes, but that doesn't change the mechanism. When you open your borders to a flood of Syrian refugees, there are going to be agent provocateurs coming in with them. That is exactly what happened to France. Now, because the passports are fake, we don't know who these people really were or where they originated. But they did come into the country pretending to be Syrian refugees. Now, Governor Jay Inslee over at Washington State is out there saying, we welcome those seeking refuge. We're going to open our borders. So these two agendas blend everybody together, leading to a single global government, and the war on terror have collided head-on, and they're trying to sort the mess out. So, it's confused here. Now, article coming out of Investment Watch blog. Thousands of Syrian refugees being resettled by Obama could end up in 48 out of 50 states. Maybe not. More when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to grab a phone call from Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike?
Doing
Mike,
good.
I just heard Dr. Michael Savage on my way home, and he shocked me. I mean, he will step out. He will go a little further than most of your mainstream talk radio. But he said he thinks that the United States and Israel has been using ISIS as a proxy army. I'm not a proxy army as Tyson. And yet that goes to another question I have then for you.
I'm going to have to take back some of the bad things I said about Mr. Savage.
Okay. But that goes to another question I have for you, too, is that do you think that is there any kind – I know you're pretty knowledgeable about all this stuff. Do you think there's any kind of a tie-in between some forms of Judaism and the Wahhabism form of Islam that's practiced in Saudi Arabia and practiced by a lot of these terrorists, and that might be one of the reasons for the alliance?
No, what you're looking at here is basically an alliance between political interests. And the politicians, rulers throughout history, have always used religion to get the public to go along with what is basically political agendas of greed and conquest. Okay,
yeah,
so, you know, I don't want to get into Wahhabism or Judaism. That's a tool with which to gull the masses. And I'd rather move one level up, you know, to those people who use religion to get the public to go along with whatever it is they're trying to do.
But there even seem to be some coercion between not only Israelis but American Jews and the Muslim Brotherhood. Even you see the marriage between what's your name, Obadin something or another who's known to have Muslim Brotherhood connections? And
well, if there's coercion going on, it's starting to fall apart because, as we reported last week, latest polls among both British and American Jews are finding a tremendous disaffection with the actions of the government of Israel, and they're starting to pull back. Now, under their religion, they're constrained from publicly criticizing other Jews, but in this poll, they basically said, "Yeah, we've got problems with what Israel is doing in our name."
But that's not the point. Is though that I understand that, but there are different forms of Judaism and there are different forms of Islam,
and there's different forms of Christianity, and some are more militant than others. You've got you didn't see the Baptists out there in the Inquisition or burning the witches, for example. Okay.
That's true.
Okay, thanks a lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. All righty. Now, before the commercial break, I was talking about how the official U.S. government policy is we are still welcoming the refugees. We're bringing them. In fact, it was on Fox News over the commercial break. And the plan is that these refugees are going to go to 49 of the 50 states. But maybe not. Michigan and Alabama immediately announced they will not accept any Syrian, Middle Eastern migrants anymore, period, end of discussion. And what's really interesting, I had posted a comment on one of the corporate media websites and I got jumped all over, saying as long as you have these open borders, the terrorists are going to come in. They say, well, the problem is the terrorists, it's not the Syrians, and it's not fair to penalize the Syrians, for the actions of the terrorists. Well, that's a nice ideal. But if the terrorists are pretending to be Syrians with forged passports that are virtually impossible to detect by the border control people, then the problem is not the Syrians or the terrorists, it is that open border. And our country cannot absorb this mass of people any more than it can absorb all the illegal immigrants coming up from Central America. We don't have jobs for our own population right now. It's insane to be flooding this country with people from other parts of the globe when we can't take care of our own people. And I know it's not politically correct to express a sense of nationalism, of wanting to put my country ahead of the rest of the world, but that's exactly the way I feel. It actually was the way I was raised when I was a kid. Our country first and foremost. When we're taken care of and we have something left over, we will be charitable to those other nations around us. But we don't gut our own country just so we can look good to other people coming on in. Now, as of last count, joining Michigan and Alabama, we're hearing now a total of 10 states have already said we're not going to allow this anymore. The list is Alabama, Arizona, Arkansas, Illinois, Indiana, Louisiana, Michigan, Mississippi, Massachusetts, and Texas. In response to Friday's attack, are saying we will not accept any Syrian refugees, and already we are hearing experts in the federal government saying, you states don't have the legal authority to block the refugees. If we, Washington, D.C., says that you will accept all these potential terrorists, then by golly, you will do that and you will not argue. So, if there is a Big Bang in the United States of America blamed on ISIS or the Syrians, we know who the blame ultimately goes to, this misguided open borders immigration policy. The latest Reuters Ipsos poll is showing 52% of Americans think allowing unchecked immigration into this country, whether it's Mexicans or Syrians or whoever, makes the country less safe. And Paris proved it. It isn't an issue whether or not the terrorists really were Syrian or not. And again, we've already got confirmation. One of them was a French national. Yes, the passports were fake. We don't know who they really were, but they're using Syrian passports, fake Syrian passports, to gain entry to the country. The time has come to slam the gate shut. Now, UNICEF has come out with a calculation that they're estimating 700,000 children in Donbass could freeze to death in the coming winter. What do you mean, freeze to death? This is the age of human-caused global warming. Everything's roasty-toasty. Snowfalls are supposed to be a thing of the past. And I'm sure UNICEF is out there, trick-or-treat for UNICEF, where we're past Halloween. It's a fundraiser, but they're out there. basically saying all these people in all these war-torn areas who don't have solid homes around them, holes in the wall, windows broken, the wind comes on right through, yeah, people are going to freeze to death in this coming hard winter, and it's going to be a brutal winter, regardless of what Al Gore and his minions say. It's going to be a brutal winter. And the at-risk people in the war zones or the homeless in our cities are going to be dying in huge numbers. Probably already have these last few winters. They're just, bodies are picked up after the spring melt and taken away. Who knows what they're doing with them? Remember how recently they came out and they found human DNA in processed meat products? Kind of makes you think. Alrighty, we have long talked about the F-35, the most expensive warplane ever built in the history of planet Earth. And it continues to disappoint. Can't fly in the fog, can't fly in the rain, can't fly near thunderstorms. The software for the onboard cannon is still a few years away. The helmet fire control system, $400,000 just for the helmet, because it has to be custom fitted to the pilot. That doesn't work. And now we're hearing that following durability tests, the Pentagon has found cracks in the wings of the F-35. This thing should have been canceled long ago. Huge amount of money poured into this boondoggle. And it can be beaten in a dogfight by a 1970s vintage fighter. It's a disaster. We're actually going to go out and try and go up against the Russians in this thing? I don't think so. All right, we're going to take another break here for commercials. When we come on back, we're going to talk a little bit about Fukushima. Things are kind of steaming over there. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. A couple of breaking headlines. Over in Yemen, the Ansarullah fighters have apparently killed dozens of the Saudi forces who are trying to reinvade and conquer Yemen on behalf of the United States of America. And apparently these Saudi troops walked into an ambush, which is the sort of thing that happens when you go into other people's countries and try and mess around with them. Earlier today, we were reporting on how the White House is saying that ISIS lacks the capability to attack the United States. This is now being disputed by the commissioner of the New York Police Department, saying that ISIS could attack any second. They're here, they're now, they're hiding in the clothes hamper, whatever. All right, let's talk about Fukushima. I don't think anybody is going to argue with the fact that this is the greatest environmental disaster in history, paired with the greatest cover-up in history. Not very good, but certainly a lot of effort went into it. When it first happened, there were these announcements of intense amounts of radiation, then they come back and say, oh no, it's not that bad. Somebody did a calculator error. The calculator made a mistake. It's nowhere near as bad as all that. And we have been hearing all these pronouncements about, don't worry, it's not a big deal. And always the physical evidence has contradicted the official story. When that one reactor blew, and they kept saying it was just hydrogen gas, and we pointed out when hydrogen burns, it produces steam, which is white. And the color of the plume over the building was a pale, sickly yellow-green, which happens to be the color of the quadrivalent form of plutonium oxide. And over time, they've allowed out a little more and a little more. Yes, some of the reactors had total catastrophic meltdowns. The reactor cores burned through the bottom of the building down into the ground. A real-life China syndrome. And now they're being forced to acknowledge that radiation at the site is actually increasing. And because of some of the isotopes being detected, there's clearly uncontrollable, spontaneous nuclear fission taking place in the ground underneath. It is a bad one. No question about it. Far worse than Chernobyl. Far worse than 3 Mile Island. Now, up in Canada, there's a researcher, Jay Cullen, and he did a study on the impact of Fukushima radiation on the Pacific coast. and he expected some criticism, but he started getting death threats. Somebody somewhere does not want you to know the threat from Fukushima radiation to the west coast of the Americas, and of course we're concerned about it here in Hawaii. But when the interested parties, whether it's the government of Japan, the government of Canada, General Electric, TEPCO, when they resort to death threats, you know they're panicking. Now remember back when Fukushima happened and the news media, the same news media that told us Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons, came out and actually said a little radiation is good for you. Ann Coulter was infamous for pushing that line. A little radiation is good for you. Didn't see her over there in Fukushima with a shovel helping to clean up the mess. Well, apparently, in anticipation of some scary numbers, the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission is going to eliminate the current system for determining the safe exposure to radiation, the linear no threshold, LNT basis, that they've been using it for decades, and replace it with the radiation hormesis theory, which is the theory that says low doses of radioactivity are good for people. Now, this theory has no foundation. In fact, it turned out it was based on a statistical anomaly. But very clearly, the U.S. NRC understands people who own their own radiation detectors, and a lot of people do now, are going to start seeing elevating numbers. And the government's line is going to be, don't worry about it, it's good for you. You know, it's good for you. I'm going to give you that Bruce Willis, Yul Brynner look. And of course, there are criticisms coming from the Nuclear Information and Resource Service saying that if they implement this model to determine what is a harmful dose of radiation, a lot of people are going to suffer death and misery needlessly. It's all politics. It's all about protecting the profitability of the nuclear industry. And that is the depths of fascism our government has sunk to. That as long as something is making money, it's okay if it's harming and killing people in reasonable limited numbers. It's a cost-benefit analysis. You know, if not enough people are dying to end the profit, we'll just let it keep on going. Once enough people die where the lawsuits are going to raise the profit margin, then we'll step in and act like we're doing our duty. We've seen that with nuclear power. We've seen it with GMO. We've seen it with pharmaceuticals, especially vaccines. And apparently Congress has just passed a law regarding mandatory vaccination for all military veterans. You don't have a choice anymore, even when you are out of your active military service. Now, here's where it gets a little bit worrying, because it may not be directly connected to Fukushima, but to something else far darker. Because there's an article over in Popular Science on how the Department of Homeland Security is buying wearable radiation detectors for all their people. It's sort of like a Fitbit. It's going to be on their body, and if they encounter radiation, it will sound an alarm. So follow me on this one. Another article coming out of Yahoo News. The fuel for a nuclear bomb is in the hands of an unknown black marketeer from Russia. They're putting out the story that there is an unsecured nuclear fuel element, bomb element, weapons grade, floating around the black market. Gee, who would buy that and use it on the United States of America? So when we have Lindsey Graham and his ilk out there saying, oh yes, ISIS is going to do something really spectacular in this country, would they really nuke a U.S. city to get the war fever going? Yeah, because nothing else is working. And that's something you need to understand about these leaders and politicians. There is nothing they will not do to get what they want. History has shown that. Roosevelt gladly wrote off a few ships and their crews to get us into World War II. Woodrow Wilson wrote off the Lusitania and its passengers to get us into World War I. It's just a cost of doing business. Now, rulers will get away with things that they do when their populations believe that our government would never do anything like that, even though history has shown all the other governments do. There are still Americans walking around today saying, our government wouldn't lie to us the way other governments lie to their people. Of course they would. And it's not only naive, it's actually racist to think that we in the United States are somehow immune from these evils just because we're Americans. But I think we have cause to be concerned because if the Egyptian plane crash didn't get the war fever going, doesn't look like Paris is going to get the war fever going, do you think this government's just going to quit? Or are they going to keep on doing greater and greater staged terror attacks until all Americans are enraged and ready to fling their babies onto the designated enemy's bayonets? Of course they are. They can't turn around and go back. They've gone too far down this path of conquering the world's resource-rich areas and shackling them to the U.S. dollar. If they quit now, the U.S. economy will implode and take the federal government with it. So absolutely, I would not bet even a penny that the U.S. government wouldn't set off a nuclear bomb somewhere in the United States of America to get the American people ready to commit war across the globe. We got to take a break for our top of the hour news and commercials. Back with hour number 3 after these 2 words. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. We're going to go ahead and take a phone call here from Jay in Atlanta. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. It's DJ from Atlanta.
Ah, okay. My mistake.
Yeah. No, you're good. Yeah, I just wanted to bring to light, it was an article in the Times of Israel. They said the security officials in France's Jewish community had got an advanced warning that morning. And so the whole storyline about this attack coming as a complete surprise where the government didn't know about it or intelligence agencies that didn't know what was going on is totally fabricated because I mean, it says it's printed in their, Times of Israel right now. And,
yeah, we link to that, and there's also in Europe it's being reported that Germany knew something was going to happen. The French government knew all these so-called players, and by the way, the named suspects, except for the 2 phony Syrian passports, these are all French and Belgian nationals that are coming out as having perpetrated this thing. But it is significant because if you remember on 9/11. First of all, none of the Israelis who worked in the World Trade Towers showed up that morning. And there is a company called Odaigo, which manages backbone traffic for instant messaging services, which is a wonderful way to peek in what people are saying to each other. And they have offices or had offices in New York near the World Trade Center. And they received a warning of the 9/11 terror attacks before the aircraft involved had even left the ground. And
exactly.
The managers of Odaigo said they had tracked the IP address the warning had come from. They gave it to the FBI, and that was the last anybody ever heard of it.
Yeah, exactly. I saw that was it made me think of that. And the fact that the Western media or, the security never tells us, about a pending attack is also unfortunate. And it even says, there in the nightclub itself, the owners who are, Jewish had sold the nightclub, like a month ago.
And they'd owned it for like 40 years. And then all of a sudden, a month ago, they put it up for sale.
Yeah. And I just find that another weird coincidence that, they had done many fundraisers for the IDF. They had a bunch of anti-Israel protests there at the nightclub. It's just the whole thing smells like another, 9/11 style, Hegelian dialectic, type attack where, they just, like you said, use it to generate support for more war. And, it's sad, but I thought that was interesting.
Well, yeah, we had linked to that. We'd put it up earlier, and we'd made the parallel to the Odaigo situation. Obviously, some people did know ahead of time. Obama is claiming he didn't, which, if somebody in Israel knew this was going to happen enough to call the Paris Jewish Community Centers, why not a phone call to the White House? But if we take Obama at his word that they had no specific intelligence this attack was going to happen, it tells us that the NSA, the FBI, and the CIA are a complete useless waste of money. It is time to shut them down, save all those taxpayer dollars, and give us back our Bill of Rights, because what they're doing now clearly does not work.
Exactly. Either way you look at it, yeah, it's either a failure, and we all believe it's a lie. They're lying openly, but
true.
Like you said, if we believe them, if we went ahead and believed their story, then yeah, they're totally worthless.
Oh, and they're coming up with excuses why all this surveillance on law-abiding citizens didn't work. Oh, they were using PlayStations this time, and we haven't gotten around to backdooring the PlayStations. And, it's just complete and utter nonsense. I mean, only in government, is failure rewarded with bigger budgets and more authority and power.
All right, Mike. Thanks for taking my call, man.
All right, you got it. We're going to let you go. Now then, getting on to human-caused global warming. One of the after effects of the attacks in Paris is that France has dictated some changes to the United Nations Climate Summit in Paris starting in 2 weeks' time. They're going to limit it to the core negotiations only, and they're canceling all of the planned marches and concerts and protests and demonstrations. Okay? And so what this means, using the Paris attack as an excuse, all opinions doubting climate change will be silenced, and the core negotiations, which are simply the conclusions they've been trying to push for years, will be the default base. We start out, global warming is real, it's all the fault of people, what are we going to do about it? Nobody will be allowed to say otherwise, because the terrorists will win if you doubt human-caused global warming. Alrighty, we're going to grab ourselves another phone call here. Francis in Vancouver. Aloha, Francis. Welcome to the show. You're on the air. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. There's a couple of little brief things I want to discuss with you. First of all, I want to bring your attention to an interesting, actually an amusing video. Senator Lindsey Graham grills Defense Secretary Ashton Carter and Joint Chiefs Chairman over Syria. And it's a bizarre committee meeting where Lindsey Graham has this little hissy fit on them. And it's bizarre because he's actually demanding that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff be making political decisions about who should be attacked. And like these are obviously issues that should be decided by the Senate or the Congress and the President, not general. And like basically he's sort of having a fit because nobody's aggressive enough in attacking Assad.
Well, is that the same one where the Joint Chiefs come out and admit that, or the chairman comes out and admits that the U.S. has been supplying and funding and training these terrorist groups?
Not quite. Actually, he doesn't even get to say much because Senator Graham is having such a tantrum on him. Just Google Senator Graham grills Defense Secretary and Joint Chiefs Chairman over Syria.
Okay,
it's quite an amusing video.
Okay, if you have that URL handy, if you could email that to me, and I'll take a look and put it up. But there, Lindsey Graham is definitely one of the people out there saying more war on the Fox News channel during the commercial break. There, Dianne Feinstein is out there demanding we do more against ISIS. Okay, Dianne, here's your rifle, here's your parachute, here's your Dayglow orange jumpsuit left over from the CIA torture centers. Go have fun. And, I'm getting sick and tired of all these people getting on up there and acting like they're brave as long as it's somebody else's kids who are going to be catching the bullets. And it's really quite disgusting how hard they're pushing this war agenda. And as I said earlier in the show, my concern is, the Egyptian plane, the Russian plane that crashed in Egypt didn't get the response they wanted. I don't think they're going to get the response they want from the Paris attacks. They're not going to get public support for any more war. And I think they'll just go on, keep on doing more and more spectacular things until everybody just says, "Oh, we're off and running here." Now, last Friday, following the attack in Paris, I ran a poll on my website: "Is this a false flag attack?" And it came out 85% yes. And then I reran the poll yesterday to get the trend, and yesterday's poll was 95% think it was a false flag.
Yeah.
So
everyone sees, like, Israel is so obvious now. They've only got a couple little buttons they can push to get what they want, and they push those buttons so many times, everyone just gets inured to it. The other thing I want to discuss with you.
Well, I'm going to have to ask you to stay over the commercial break. It's a 4-minute commercial break.
Okay.
And then when we come on back, just pick up where you left off. And we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking with Francis in Vancouver. And Francis, you said you had one more thing you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, you were a engineer or a scientist for the NASA, right?
Many, many years ago, yes.
Right, but there's something I've noticed is it's this huge entity, and yet nobody, even people who are 9/11 truthers, a lot of them don't really know about it. And that's the NRO, which is just an incredible economic, technological engine, and it's all taking place under the works. Like nobody really notices it. And I was wondering if in one of your programs you could maybe do a 10, 15-minute special to educate, use all your knowledge of the space program and stuff, and to educate people on what the NRO is, what you think it's up to. And I'm particularly thinking of this character, or not character, a writer, F. Trowbridge Ford, I think is his name. And he feels that the NRO is capable of even triggering off earthquakes in China.
That's a little bit out there. The National Reconnaissance Office organization basically was set up to consolidate all of the other agencies' individual surveillance satellite programs. There was a huge duplication of effort at a huge cost, and so the NRO was set up. It's very closely tied in with CIA, but basically they are now in charge of all reconnaissance around the globe on behalf of the U.S. government. And they run the spy satellites. They run anything that's an asset up there in space in order to peek down. And
do they have secret?
Sorry, what?
Do they have secret space stations? Do they have secret space stations we don't know about, like manned space stations?
Well, it's pretty hard to hide something up in space because, as you know, a lot of amateur astronomers, as part of their hobby, they observe objects orbiting overhead and they check them against the databases. And a lot of this comes about because a lot of amateurs are trying to spot asteroids or comets they can get their names on. And it's very, very difficult. In fact, I would say at this point, it's pretty much impossible to put anything of any size up in space without it being spotted eventually and reported on the various astronomy blogs. In terms of smaller platforms with stealth capability, absolutely, I think that's definitely going to be part of what they're doing, but I don't think they're going to be manned. They're going to be very small and very dark in order that they do not get noticed or detected on radar.
Okay, great. Well, anytime, if you ever do feel like going into even greater depth, that'd be welcome, because I think that's an organization that needs to look. It's got a huge budget. It's just got a huge black budget.
Well, yeah, they're the satellite guys. They're paying for all the rocket launches, and like the one that we just had blow up on the pad out here in Kauai a couple of weeks back. All right, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. Getting on back to human-caused global warming. NOAA, the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration, is finding itself in a little bit of congressional hot water because not too long ago they issued a report insisting there had been no pause to human-caused global warming. Temperature had continued to rise steadily year after year after year despite the obvious evidence of harsh winters. And Congress came back and said, we want to do a double check. We want your raw data and your methodology, and NOAA is refusing. Now remember, the foundation principle of all scientific theory is the principle of reproducibility. If I conduct an experiment and I come to a result, any other scientist should be able to conduct that same experiment and come to the exact same result. That's a check. That's what reproducibility is for. It is a core principle of the scientific method. When you have somebody purporting to be a scientific, institution, and they come on out with a proclamation about human-caused global warming, and then when they're asked for a copy of the data and methodology, they refuse, they're pulling a fraud of some kind, whether it's the National Oceanographic or Atmospheric Administration or the Hadley Climate Research Unit at the University of East Anglia, which when they were asked for a copy of their raw data and methodology by which they came up with the hockey stick, they came out and said, oh, well, we didn't have enough hard disk room for all the data, so we just deleted it. Just take our word for it. We're scientists. We got white lab coats and we got gold things on the wall. You should just believe what we tell you because we're scientists. And, of course, that's complete nonsense. We're going to grab a phone call here. Nathan in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Mike. Enjoying your show very much. Real quickly, and I know you got a lot of stuff to do here, but the death threats to Jay Cullen, and there's another guy out at Woods Hole in Massachusetts. They're coming from a guy in Canada by the name of Dana who lives around the Powell River area. He's a big fraudster on YouTube, been running around Vancouver Island saying that everything is dead, taking pictures of dead of bare rocks. He's going to be in court Wednesday, and I'll be happy to call you back in a week and let you know what happened.
Okay, well,
But it's not from TEPCO,
Okay, well, I'm glad that you clarified that, but, you have to take death threats seriously. And very often, when you get a death threat, it usually means that what you're doing is a threat to somebody's agenda. But it does get back to this issue of the fact that TEPCO, the government of Japan, General Electric, government of Canada, government of the United States have not been forthcoming. And so if they have a credibility problem, it's of their own making.
I agree with you, Michael, but, you cannot get on YouTube and say these people need to be hacked up with machetes and hung and all of this stuff and make,
I agree.
Accusations. I mean, how would you like somebody doing that to you on YouTube? And the Canadian government
happens all the time.
The Canadian government is, I'm sorry, my deepest sympathies. But just to sum up, and I'll get going. But the Canadian government is, very angry at this person. He will be in court. He has been he has had problems with the RCMP in the past, as I understand it, and I'll be happy to, give you a little heads up in about a week.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Again, one last question, if I can, on Syria.
Yes.
Israel bombed the Damascus airport area last week. Has anybody got a heads up on that? How Russia feels about it? All I know is 11 months ago, they bombed that particular area because they suspected some S-300 missiles were in a warehouse. But I haven't heard anything about this bombing and how Russia feels about it, and it seems like it just disappeared.
Well, I think Israel's bombing run at that time was trying to provoke the situation and escalate it, and Putin wasn't going to let that happen. That's what I think went down with that, because it's not like he doesn't have more weapons to send. Nathan, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. We'll be back in a minute. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking about human-caused global warming, and as you know, we have had several record-setting winters in a row ever since that banner headline at the UK Independent, snowfalls are now a thing of the past. And by the way, the UK Independent has now Orwellized that page. Make it go away. No, we never said that. Really? Except, of course, we all kept screen captures of that. Now, as reported by Watchdog.org, U.S. Representative Paul Grijalva of Arizona, the top Democrat on the House Natural Resources Committee, is among a group of Democrats who are demanding that colleges and universities turn over grants, congressional testimony, and all other activities from any professors and scientists who have testified at congressional climate hearings challenging the orthodoxy of global warming. And the group, according to the College Fix, is being targeted because they're not buying into the argument that this can all be blamed on man-made activities. It's the return of McCarthyism. You believe what we tell you to believe, or you won't. Now then, in 1990, the National Science Foundation committed the United States to future climate treaties, thus guaranteeing tens of billions of taxpayer dollars for scientists for future climate boondoggles in places like Cancun. Now, since 1990, the Earth has warmed about 1/10 of 1 degree centigrade. That warming happened just this year because of El Nino. The previous year, there was no detectable warming. Now, the El Nino current originates in a large number of volcanoes on the floor of the ocean underneath where the current appears. That's got nothing to do with human activity, does it? Now, I actually had an email from a climatologist who took to issue all these stories about how the Earth is a half a degree warmer or it's a half a degree cooler or anything, and basically came out and said that even the most precise laboratory thermometers can be off by as much as 2 degrees. They're just not that accurate. And most of the thermometers that were certainly being used in the last century weren't even that accurate. So, now as I mentioned, the UK Independent has pulled that story. Snowfalls are now a thing of the past, but we all kept copies here. Meanwhile, in the real world, Boulder weather, they're expecting up to 5 inches of snow tonight. Britain is on a snow alert. Temperatures will plunge to -6 degrees centigrade. Freezing gales coming in from the Arctic. Down in Southern California, they're in a major storm cold temperatures. The snow level will drop to 3,000 feet according to the National Weather Service. Big Bear is expecting 5 to 6 inches of snow overnight. The winter storm could drop up to 2 feet of snow on the Rockies. Story out of AccuWeather. Blizzard to Bury, Colorado, Nebraska, and Kansas early this week. The white stuff is coming on down. And they're still out there trying to convince you the world is getting warmer. It's caused by carbon dioxide, which is caused exclusively by you. And it's nonsense. Remember, last week, the Royal Astronomical Society in London came out with their report confirming the data, showing the sun is going into a cooling phase, a new Maunder minimum. We'll be fully into it by 2030. And the last time we had a Maunder minimum, we had the Little Ice Age. And it's going to happen again. Now, the carbon Nazis have been trying to get away from using the phrase global warming by switching to climate change on this idea that climate should be absolutely locked in a particular configuration to their arbitrary definition of what is perfect, which is impossible to do. Climate always changes. It always has. It always will. The problem is saying climate change does not get you to a carbon tax unless you can say specifically, is the climate getting warmer or colder? Because if it's getting colder, then this whole theory about greenhouse gas and we've got to control carbon emissions goes out the window. But the goal of all of this isn't protecting the climate or protecting the earth or protecting the environment. It is imposing a global carbon tax as another system of hegemonic domination of national economies. By arrogating to the United Nations the authority to tell countries how much of their oil and gas and coal they can sell or not. That's what it's all about, more control. Now, Ben Carson has come out with a statement, one of few that I agree with. Congress should stop funding refugee resettlement in the United States of America. It's going to cost millions, if not billions, of taxpayer dollars that we just don't have. Carson then kind of undermined his own comment by saying that we should give all the refugees or immigrants coming across the border an ideological test to make sure that their ideology is in line with what is America. And yes, I'm absolutely certain that a terrorist who's gone to all the trouble of infiltrating the United States disguised as a refugee is going to admit that he really wants to destroy the great state in America when he's asked that question at the border. It's another example of a good soundbite that somebody didn't think all the way through. Now, getting back onto the topic of more false flag terror, apparently Saturday night at the United States Army Reserve Armory in Worcester, Massachusetts, there was a break-in, and a significant amount of weaponry was stolen. The FBI will not specify how many weapons or what types were taken. We're not supposed to know, but somebody is running around New England area with a whole bunch of very deadly weapons. And it's not just the United States here, because apparently, according to this story over in 12160, 40 grenades and 180 detonators and huge amount of plastic explosives just got stolen from a French military base. My concern is they're just going to go on blowing things up and saying, oh, it's ISIS, it's the terrorists, until they wear us down. There's so much blood flowing. Okay, yes, go ahead, have a war, have a world war, burn up the surface of planet Earth. I'm tired of listening to all this nonsense. Now, over at the Journal of the American Medical Association, they have published a study titled Impact of Influenza Vaccination on Seasonal Mortality in the U.S. Elderly Population, as usual with a science report. Very dull, dry title. And wading through the text of it, the abstract, the short version is they can't find that the elderly population of the United States get any benefit at all from the seasonal flu vaccines. Doesn't seem to do anything at all. Doesn't reduce their rate of disease or mortality. But by golly, they want you to buy them anyway. Now, over at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, there's a graduate student who has issued a $10 million challenge to Monsanto, basically to prove that there are some kind of real safety assessment standards for GMO. Dr. V.A. Shiva Ayadurai threw down the gauntlet, saying it's next to impossible to disprove his claim that safety assessment standards for GMO actually exist, or are non-existent, rather. He is saying there aren't any. There are no standards. They just say it's safe. One of the other things that he's discovered is that GMO plants accumulate formaldehyde, something natural plants don't do, and that's a problem for people like my wife who are sensitive to formaldehyde. Causes joint pain. And now they're telling us they're not going to label the GMO food, so my wife won't know if what she's eating is going to cause her pain. But it makes money, and that makes everything all hunky-dory. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the last segment of our program today, and the corporate media is just still nonstop. Paris, Paris, terror, terror. ISIS coming for America. ISIS going to do this. ISIS is hiding under your bed. ISIS is stealing socks out of your dryer. ISIS is passing gas. And they're trying to crank it up. And a listener just wrote in an email that apparently the Sundance Channel tonight is playing the movie Sum of All Fears, based on the Tom Clancy novel. And for those of you not familiar with the storyline for Sum of All Fears is basically terrorists set off a nuclear weapon inside the United States of America in order to trigger a war with Russia. Rather ironic timing there with what's going on. And I had another reader write in basically saying, yeah, Paris is because they couldn't get what they wanted from the plane crash in Egypt. And if they don't get what they want from Paris, what will they do next? The answer is anything they think is necessary. I don't think this is over. I think Paris is Act 1 on a much grander production, if you will. Okay, getting on to the subject of computers. We're seeing more and more of these extortion attacks by cyber criminals against companies like Proton Mail, Fast Mail. And the extortion is very simple. They've got dedicated bots for distributed denial of service attacks, and they'll just mount it until the target pays a ransom through Bitcoin. And again, the NSA can't find these people, can they? Not a one. So one of two explanations suggest themselves. One, the NSA is totally incompetent and a waste of money and should be shut down. Or two, NSA is behind the cybercrime as another way of plundering wealth from the American people. Take your pick, because I don't see a third option in there at all. And remember, Kaspersky Labs identified one of the global hacker groups, the Equation Group, as definitely being part of the National Security Agency. Little lesson from history. You will learn that when it comes to conflict, bad behavior, the teller of white lies will lose to the teller of black lies, who will lose to the robber, who will lose to the blackmailer, who will lose to the murderer, who will lose to the genocidal tyrant. All governments tend toward their most extreme. And so the question to ask in these dark times is not, what is our government capable of? The question to ask is, what is our government not capable of? It's going to be a much shorter list. Now then, on iPhone, this started coming up last week, apparently the iPhone has a system that automatically, and without most people's knowledge, records where you go. Now, iPhone claims this is to help it target advertising towards you more effectively, but a lot of people are very concerned because obviously, if the police grab your iPhone or they're just getting into it with Stingray, they're going to know where you have been. And maybe you've been someplace that you don't want to share with anybody, like the donut shop on your way home from work when you're on a diet. Or you stopped off for a drink at a bar where the girls are dancing naked, something you don't want your wife to know. We all have needs for privacy that are benign. We're not committing crimes. We just want to be private. And the iPhone apparently saves everywhere you go. Now, the good news is, at least of the version of iOS 9 I have on my iPhone, you can turn that feature off, and there is a button that says delete the data. Whether it really does or not, I don't know. But it's another reminder on how this government has literally turned our personal appliances that we own against us. And all of it is a violation of the Fifth Amendment, which says the government cannot use our personal property without just compensation. And all of this spying involves using our computers that we paid for, our software, our bandwidth. And we're not getting just compensation for it at all. So in addition to being a violation of the Fourth Amendment, it's a violation of the Fifth Amendment. And if you think about it, it's a violation of the Ninth and Tenth Amendment as well. The U.S. government is batting 400 in terms of defying or violating the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, which makes it an illegitimate, illegal government of this land. Now, last week we were reporting on how finally it was made public, the hackers that had broken into J.P. Morgan Chase, Citi, Dow Jones Industrial, and they've known since June. The indictments were handed down. They're talking about extradition. All three were Israelis, two of them living in Israel, waiting extradition now. And a lot of people have called out the U.S. government and the corporate media because from June till the present, when they knew who the hackers were, the media was telling us it's probably the Russians or it's probably the Chinese. And they knew it wasn't. They knew it wasn't. Now then, Apple is pulling the plug on the Beats music system. It has not worked out well for them because we don't have money to pay for music anymore. And these days, corporate-produced modern music all sounds the same. It doesn't have the spirit or the content of the original 60s rock and roll. It's product support for something else. So, Beats Music streaming service, all subscriptions will be canceled at the end of this month. And Beats Music is going to go away. To be very honest, I didn't even know it existed. Story coming out of the Daily Sheeple. Hillsborough, Florida, 4th grader was recently threatened by his school with arrest for sexual harassment charges for writing a love letter. At that age, 9-year-old kid, he doesn't know what sex or sexual harassment is. I remember when I was a kid in school, Valentine's Day, you were encouraged to write love letters. It's amazing. For some reason, the government has decided to go back on the warpath against laser pointers. And there was this story coming out, it was even in the corporate media. CNN reported more than 20 aircraft struck by lasers Wednesday night. We've got to ban the lasers. And I don't know why they're wagging that one again, because remember, during the Egyptian revolution that got Hosni Mubarak out of power, there was a government helicopter hovering overhead, and it was just painted with 1,000 laser pointers. Didn't bother them one tiny bit. Kept right on flying, undisturbed. And the fact of the matter is, laser pointers are not true lasers. The beam actually does spread out over distance. And by the time first of all, the idea that you can stand on the ground and actually keep the beam focused on a cockpit window is ludicrous. If you have accuracy like that, I'm sure the U.S. government wants to hire you as a sniper. But by the time it gets to the airplane, it's fanned out so much, they're not going to see it. And yes, there was the obligatory stage photo of a flight crew sitting in a cockpit in an airplane on the ground and a little green laser coming in and wiping across their face. It's nonsense. It's just more booga booga. Amazing. According to the NCR, National Catholic, I'm forgetting what the acronym stands for. Basically, the U.S. Catholic Church has incurred nearly $4 billion in costs related to clerical sex abuse over the past 65 years. And basically says there have been scandal-related consequences, lost membership, diverted giving, that has cost the church an additional $2.3 billion annually for the last 30 years. And yeah, if you're going to behave like that, while claiming to be the earthly representatives of a supreme moral authority, people are going to get discouraged. They're going to find someplace else to worship and to do charitable good. There's our music. Time for us to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We will be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay skeptical, stay informed. Keep your eyes out for another false flag. I think they've got another one already in the works. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.